consider how we can buy into this vision. Of course, begin to pray, use your gifts, yield your life to Christ. We're not asking God just to bless what we're doing. We're saying, God, how can we be used by you to do what you want us to do? Begin to pray, use your gifts, yield to Christ. In 4 words that we're using to help us understand this. The first we looked at 2 weeks ago was initiate. That we want to initiate relationships with people. The understanding is that all people, whether we're aware of this or not, are on a spiritual journey. That God really is at work trying to initiate a relationship between that person and who God is. God's already at work. And so we want to trust that if God is initiating that spiritual hunger within people, that we want to be aware when we have new relationships. Perhaps this is a person our path is crossing with because God is trying to do something with us. And that place where God is at work, and that place where we're available to be used by God, that place those cross, powerful things can happen. And so once we have initiated relationships, we begin to look for that perfect time when we can invite people to come and participate in the community of faith. Come and invite people to participate in those things that God is doing in us, helping to transform our lives. Doesn't it slow down? I'm not talking fast enough for you this morning. Just checking. I mean, they're running the marathon. I don't want them getting here until we're done. All right? We want to invite 80% of people that come to a church for the first time come because somebody they know invited them. 70%, staggering number, 70% of all unchurched people have never been invited to church. So we want to be a group that understands God's initiating a spiritual hunger. God's bringing these people to a place where our paths cross. We want to invite them to come. Today we're going to look at that third word, and that would be the word involved. What does it mean to be involved in a church? Now, I don't often do this, but I got out my Webster's Dictionary, 1983 edition, to look at definitions for the word involved. I did not know there were so many definitions for the word involved. One definition I found was to make intricate, tangled, and complex. We're not trying to make it hard around here, so that's not the definition we're going to consider. Another definition would be to tangle up with difficulty, trouble, and danger. We're not wanting to make it dangerous for people to come here, okay? When we talk about involved, we're talking about this definition. To participate in, to affect, to relate to. To relate to what God is doing through this church. To participate in what God is doing in this church. To affect what God is doing in this church. This is what we're talking about. And I'm sure that you all are aware that in the course of a day, a week, a month, a year, you get asked to be involved in a lot of things. Right? People ask you to you want to make a difference. You get involved if you want to make a difference in something. We get invited to be involved in relationships. People are hurting, people are down. Sometimes a friend will say, perhaps you would benefit from a relationship with a counselor, someone who can be involved in your pain and help you work through that. We know that sometimes friends will say, hey, we're going to have a little get-together and we want you to come because we want you to be involved in what's going on. We get those invitations into relationships all the time. We also get invited to be involved in the community. Now, I know school's about over, but trust me, when school starts in August, there are more invitations to be involved than you could possibly imagine. There are invitations to be in the booster club, to be in the PTA, to be a homeroom parent, to just come to the school and help us out. That's what my wife does a couple of times a month. She goes and does copy duty at the school my children go to. You get invited to help with Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. You go to a civic organization. They want you to help with philanthropy. There's special interest groups that want you to help with social change. Y'all knew this was an election year, right? People want you to get involved in the political process. There are Chamber of Commerce wants you to help stimulate economic growth for South Oklahoma. There are all kinds of things that people invite us to get involved in, and the church is no different. The church is a place where we invite people to get involved. So what are we hoping for? What are we expecting? What are we praying will happen when people get involved in this community of faith? I would suggest to you the answer is not on the other end of that phone that's ringing right now. So quit paying attention to that and listen to me for a second, okay? I think the answer is best found in the Bible. And there's a story in the book of Acts that is about the Apostle Paul. Now, Paul is in Greece, the country of modern Greece. And what he has done is he's been in Athens. In Athens, he goes to the Areopagus. That was a place that philosophers and teachers and people that just like to be great things, they would come and they would discuss new ideas and debate. And Paul goes up to them and he says, I can tell you're very religious. You're so religious you have an idol to a God that you don't even know the name of. Let me tell you about that God, because after him you don't need any other gods. And he said this unknown God was their understanding that God was creating spiritual hunger in their lives. God was inviting them into relationship. After Paul leaves Athens, he goes to the city of Corinth. Now, Corinth was a very interesting city. It was a city you were either going to love or you were going to hate it. Because Corinth was a very diverse culture. A lot of different people, a lot of different ideas. And if the city was that way, you can imagine the church was that way. That's why we have those letters in the New Testament, 1 and 2 Corinthians. We find out what a diverse people this is. And by diverse, I mean they had a lot of different opinions, and they all thought their opinions were right. Even if it wasn't an election year, that's what they believed. And the church had all this division going on, and that's why they write the letters to help them out. What we're going to read is when Paul first goes to Corinth. Before any of this stuff ever happens, the foundational times when he goes. Give your attention, if you will, to this reading in the book of Acts. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. And there he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker, as they were, he stayed and worked with them. Every Sabbath he reasoned in the synagogues, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. When Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. But when the Jews opposed Paul and became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am clear of my responsibility. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." Then Paul left the synagogue and went next door to the house of Titius Justus, a worshiper of God. Crispus, the synagogue ruler, and his entire household believed in the Lord. And many of the Corinthians who heard him believed and were baptized. Brothers and sisters, this is the word of the Lord. The first thing that I notice about this is that when Paul goes to Corinth, Paul gets involved in the community. If we're going to do the work of God, we have got to be involved in the community. You see, Paul got involved by getting a job. He was a tent maker. Now, this is something we don't usually think about Paul. We usually think about Paul going around and just preaching the gospel, but the truth was he had to have a job to support himself. Part of the industry, part of the commerce there in Corinth was on the surrounding countryside. There were a lot of shepherds, a lot of sheep, a lot of wool, textile industry, and those shepherds had to have some place to stay, so they stayed in tents. And as such, Paul was a tent maker, and that's the first job he looks for when he goes to Corinth. He meets this couple who happen to be religious refugees. They were in Italy. Claudius says all the Jews had to get out, so they go to Corinth. Now, what we don't really know, and what people like to argue about, is whether or not Aquila and Priscilla were actually believers before Paul came, or whether they were converted under Paul's preaching. We don't really know the answer to that, but ultimately what we want to know is that Paul shared with this couple a vocation and a common faith in Christ. It makes sense to me that if God is at work in people's hearts, and God is positioning us to share good news with these people, we know and trust that God works in our hearts when we gather together to worship. But if we really want to see where God is stirring up spiritual hunger, inviting people into relationship, we need to be out in the community where a lot of those people are. Again, 70% of them have never been invited to church. Never been invited to consider life transformation as we profess to experience it through this congregation. We've got to be active in the community. I joked earlier about glad you're not running the marathon. That's a community thing, and we know some people are there because they're helping. They're not racing, they're just helping. They're involved in the community. That's a good thing. You know, when you're in the PTA, when you're in a Little League coach, all these things that we do, those are important ways that we get involved in the community. What we want to do is remember that we're ministers. And where God is at work and our availability is ready, powerful things can happen. We saw that 3 years ago. Y'all remember 3 years ago, right? Maybe it's just the time that this time of year, storm season coming up, that we begin to think and we begin to remember what happened 3 years ago when that tornado came through our community. Some of y'all can remember 17 years ago when a tornado came through the community. And 3 years ago, again, literally what God was doing in our Christian Life Center was beyond anything that I could have ever imagined God would do. I mean, we had, in this area, we had our medical room of stuff. And then you went to this area and it was our convenience store. I mean, your food, your supplies, all those things. And over here was our hardware store. It's where you could get your rakes and your shovels, or as David kept calling them, your shakes and your ruggles whenever he was doing that. And in this other area, we had clothes. And there, I mean, it was just amazing all that was going on. What we could not have imagined was how God positioned us for that. It had just been in January, before that storm hit in May, that we became certified as a Red Cross emergency shelter as a church. We just believed that was something that was good for us to be involved in our community. I suspect God knew the tornado was going to happen. And God had us ready. And when we were available, something powerful really did begin to happen. It was an amazing event. Friends, I want to tell you, I stood up with 100% confidence and I said, God has prepared us for this. God has gotten us to this point. How could we have known that a month before the tornado hit, when we were doing a seminar on storm safety for the community, that people would need that? That's a God thing. I want to say with that same level of confidence today, I believe God is positioning our church to reach families with children and youth. God is working on people in the community, so we must be involved in the community if we hope to know them. It's a no-brainer. That's where the people are that God is working in their hearts. As people of God who are ministers, that's where we need to be involved. We've got to be involved in the things Jesus was involved in because we want to participate in it. We want to affect change. We want to help what God's doing. I'm not just going to take a breath, I'm going to take a drink. Running out of spit. That's why nobody sits on the front row. We see in Paul that Paul understood the importance of being involved in the community, but beyond that, Paul also understood the importance of being involved in the community of faith. Now, if you heard it clearly, it said he was a tent maker, but every Sabbath he went to the synagogue, and that's where he tried to reason with Jews and Greeks that Jesus was the Messiah. But then Silas and Timothy come, most likely from Philippi, bringing a gift to Paul. And when that happens, Paul doesn't have to work anymore. He was able to exclusively devote his time to sharing the good news. They didn't receive it so well in the synagogue. They basically kicked him out and said that he, shook his clothes. That's the idea that a prophet would shake the dust off their clothes and move on, saying, I don't even want any of you on me. I did my job. It's up to you now. And that's what Paul does. I've done my responsibility. Your blood is on your own head. I'm getting out of here. He leaves the synagogue and he goes to the house of Titius Justus, which is a house church. It's a small gathering of Christians as it begins. He was involved in the community of faith. Now, in a small community of faith, in a small church, one of the things that I notice is everybody has a job. Everybody has a responsibility. Everybody has a role. Otherwise, the church doesn't exist. And that's really what happened in the earliest years of this church, is everybody had to have a role or things couldn't happen. It is the understanding that one of the things that helps us achieve our mission is for everyone to be involved, using your gifts. But as churches grow larger, as our church grew larger, it's easier for some people not to have a role, not to have a responsibility. You can then be a consumer. Now, I understand there are times that we really need to be in a place that we can receive, but God has given us gifts so that those gifts might be used. And we find using those in the community of faith is very helpful. Large, growing churches will tell you that they expect 2 hours a week from their members. That's what they want, 2 hours a week. Not trying to outdo them, but friends, I'm going to tell you, we want 3 hours a week. We want 1 hour a week that's given to corporate worship. You're off to a good start today because you're here. This is what we mean. 1 hour a week for corporate worship. 1 hour a week should be spent in discipleship. Whether it's a Sunday school class, a Bible study, a small group, whatever setting it is that you use, you need to have at least 1 hour a week that you are growing in your faith. Our mission is making disciples, so we have an expectation of discipleship. And that 3rd hour a week is in service to Christ. Now, some people multitask. Some people teach Sunday school, so they're serving while they're doing it. That's just smart. Some people greet. Some people are ushers. They're multitasking. That's just smart. But what I want to suggest to you is there is one area in our church that we have a very critical need for ministers right now. Now, I just became aware of this about a month ago, and I want to share it with you because it is such a critical need. You know, on Sundays I make announcements, I go get a drink, but before I preach, I like to walk down this hallway where the nursery is, and I like to spend the time getting focused, praying God's going to speak through me. Man, in the 9:30 service, we got a baby boom going on. I mean, there are rooms in there. I think there's a floor. Because there's kids all over the place. I don't even know how they get here. They can't walk, they can't drive. But I mean, the room is just full of babies. I was asking, I said, man, if we get more babies, we don't know what we're going to do. I'm like, well, use my office, but that's kind of a long ways. It's not just a space problem, it's a people problem. We need people that are going to care for babies. We need people that are willing to hold them and rock them and change them. I'll work, I can't do that. But I would, because that is such an important thing, is that we be in ministry to children. And I'm asking you, friends, if God is stirring your heart, one way of saying is just to tell our members, don't show up for worship at 9:30. We need room for all the guest babies. It's not just space. It's we need people to help, because God is positioning our church to reach families, children, and youth. I already announced it today, in about 7 weeks, we're going to have probably a minimum of 400 children that show up here at St. Andrews for Vacation Bible School. We need people to help. We need people that are willing to participate in that. Honestly, we couldn't do VBS if it weren't for our youth. If it weren't for our teenagers, we could not do Vacation Bible School. But even then, we need help. I go to camp. When we send kids to camp, whether they're children or youth, we have to send adults. We have to send people who are willing to be in ministry to them for that week. I'm going to challenge you now, because in the last service I told them, I just found out my camp that I'm in charge of, we lost our nurse. Actually, we didn't have a nurse, we had a medic. And the dude was a military medic, and it was great, because the kids were like, I don't want to go see him. You know, because he was like, here, rub some dirt on it, tape an aspirin to it, we're good to go. And so nobody wanted to get hurt, because they didn't want to go see the medic. But he can't go this year. In the last service I said that, somebody came up and said, I'm a nurse. I'm interested in going to camp. Praise the Lord. Amen? Amen. We also have somebody that wants to be a small group leader, Jonathan, so I'll give you that name after service. We need people to be in ministry. We need people to be greeters. We need people to open the door, to give that smile, welcome people into the house of God. How many times you have to say their name to remember it? I've heard 5. But we want to make sure that if people have a real need for God in their life, that they find that need met when they come here. See, friends, the reality is if you're inviting people to come to church, their level of involvement will likely mirror your own. If all you do is come to worship, that's probably all they're going to do. If you come to worship in Sunday school, worship in a small group, that's probably what they're going to do. If you show them how you're also involved using your gifts in service to Christ, there's a good chance that that is the level of commitment they will have. You see, our ultimate goal is for all of our lives to be involved with the mission of Christ. That's what we see as the fruit of what Paul does. It says that when he left the synagogue and he went to this little house church, did you hear who went with him? The ruler of the synagogue and his whole family went with Paul to this church because they now believe. I read a great quote this week. I wish I had said this because it was so good. A guy by the name of Napoleon Hill is credited. I've never heard of him before, but I like this. He said, when you get involved, you have an impact. Nobody cares about the one-loss record of the referee. I would say nobody cares about the one-loss record of the fan who sits in the stands to cheer or to criticize. We need people to get involved. To be a follower of Jesus is to involve ourselves in the things that he is doing in our community and in our community of faith. Our goal is to bring people into relationship with the Savior. Would you pray with me? Holy God, what a beautiful day you've given us. What a great day, Lord, to come together and worship and to hear some great music and to sing some great music and to see an offering of two children ringing those chimes this morning and reminding us of the greatness of how much it is you love us. And God, we know that nothing could ever separate us from your love, that you want to work in us and you want to work in this community for good. And so it is, God, we pray that we would continue to faithfully follow after you, that we can experience that place where you're initiating relationships and other people's spiritual hunger intersect with our availability so that we can see you do powerful things. And we do pray this in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. Friends, if you desire a personal time of prayer, know that you're invited to come. As you're able, I invite you to stand as we sing together.